All right, get ready. You've given us a timeline of humanity, from the first flicker of civilization to the modern world. Today, we're extracting those hidden gems from this huge sweep of history.
It's amazing to see how these sources highlight those recurring patterns of human behavior, the same drive for innovation, and let's be honest, the same tendency for conflict, just echoing across millennia.
So we're time travelers today, hitting those major milestones from the dawn of agriculture to the rise and fall of empires. But we're digging into the why should any of this matter to you today?
Exactly. What's interesting is how many of the challenges we're dealing with have their roots in decisions made by civilizations long gone. It all starts with that leap from nomadic life to settled societies.
Okay, so picture this. It's roughly 4000 BCE in the Sumerian city of Eridu. No more chasing woolly mammoths. Instead, we've got wheat, barley. Humans have figured out agriculture. What was the real game changer about this beyond just having, a steady food supply?
It really reshaped the entire human experience. Permanent settlements meant you needed organization, leadership, and with surplus food, you get specialization. Not everyone had to farm, so you see artisans, priests, even early forms of government. Eridu, by the way, had a population over 50,000, a massive city for the time.
It's fascinating that this shift to farming, as essential as it was, actually had some surprising side effects.
Mm.
Our sources mention this decrease in average human height during this period. Shouldn't a reliable food source make people healthier? Bigger, even?
You would think so. But it seems those early farmers, even with a steady food supply, weren't as nutritionally well off as they could have been. Diets super reliant on grains, not the variety of a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, plus the hard labor of early agriculture. So yeah, slightly shorter humans. Men went from an average of 5'9" to 5'3" max, women from 5'3" to 5'us. It's a reminder that progress, well, it isn't always a linear climb.
It makes you think about all those modern diet trends and debates, doesn't it? We're obsessed with what we eat, yet even with agriculture, things weren't perfect. But alongside this whole agricultural revolution, we see the first stirrings of something else, something uniquely human storytelling.
Absolutely. The Epic of Gilgamesh comes in here. This isn't just some ancient adventure tale. It grapples with questions that still haunt us. Like, what's the point of it all? What happens after we die? Thousands of years ago, those anxieties were driving human narratives.
The Epic of Gilgamesh portrays this king, desperate for immortality, facing monsters and gods. It seems like even back then, the fear of death, the yearning for something more, was a powerful motivator. But while Gilgamesh was on this mythical quest, the real world was seeing the rise and fall of very real empires.
And that's where we see that cyclical nature of power at play. The Akkadians under Sargon the Great conquered the Sumerians. They absorbed their culture, technology. We'll see this repeated throughout history. Empires rise, they fall, and new ones emerge, often building upon the achievements of their predecessors. But it's not just about conquest. It's about innovation, too.
Our sources highlight these two very different civilizations,
Yeah.
the Indus Valley and the Egyptians, both achieving incredible things but with very different priorities. What struck you about the Indus Valley civilization?
Oh, their focus on sanitation is incredible. Toilets and drainage systems, centuries ahead of their time. It makes you think they were a society concerned with public health, the well-being of citizens, a far cry from that image of, ancient cities as smelly places.
I was amazed by that too. And then you have the Egyptians, obsessed with pyramids, giant tombs for their pharaohs, stuffed with treasures for the afterlife.
It's a fascinating contrast, isn't it? The Indus Valley focused on the practicalities of life, and the Egyptians fixated on what comes after, their belief in the afterlife, their elaborate mummification rituals. It all suggests this focus on that journey to the next world.
And speaking of pyramids, you can almost hear those pharaohs, Doses, Neferu, Khufu, boasting about who had the biggest, most elaborate tomb. It makes you wonder, what drove that ambition? Was it just about the afterlife, or was there, some ego involved?
Probably a bit of both. These pyramids weren't just tombs, they were statements of power, symbols of a pharaoh's reign, his legacy. They were meant to inspire awe, remind everyone, living and dead, of the pharaoh's greatness. But while the Egyptians were building pyramids, another civilization was taking shape in the East, ancient China.
From pyramids to pagodas, our sources highlight the story of Yu the Great, a legendary figure. He tamed the Yellow River floods, setting the stage for the first dynasty in Chinese history, the Xia dynasty. Flood control, a major challenge for early civilizations.
Controlling the waters, it was essential for survival. And Yu the Great's success cemented this idea. A ruler's legitimacy wasn't just bloodlines. It was about their ability to protect their people, provide for them. This idea of merit-based leadership. Pretty intriguing, isn't it? It runs through Chinese history.
And speaking of dynasties rising and falling, can you explain the mandate of heaven? Seems pretty central to understanding Chinese history.
The mandate of heaven was essentially a divine right to rule, but there was a catch. The ruler had to be just, virtuous. Natural disasters, famines, rebellions, all signs that maybe the emperor had lost this mandate. That would justify overthrowing him. Checks and balances, but with a cosmic twist.
Any specific examples of rulers losing this mandate of heaven? How did this play out?
Well, one example is the fall of the Shang dynasty. The last Shang king, Di Xin, he was known for his cruelty and extravagance. Rebellions broke out, and the Zhou claimed they had the mandate of heaven. They overthrew the Shang, established a new dynasty.
So it wasn't just an abstract concept, it had real consequences.
Yeah.
And the Zhou dynasty, which succeeded the Shang, introduced another interesting concept: feudalism.
Feudalism, a system where land was granted for loyalty and military service. It provided some stability, but it created this hierarchy. It could lead to power struggles pretty easily. It's interesting how feudalism emerged in Europe later on, too. Similar solutions to the challenges of governing large territories. But alongside these political developments, the Zhou dynasty also saw two philosophies emerge: Confucianism and Taoism.
They seem to be at the heart of Chinese culture, even today. Can you unpack those a bit? What were the core tenets?
Well, Confucianism, with Confucius championing it, was all about social harmony. He emphasized respecting your elders, the importance of rituals, and the idea that everyone has a role to play in maintaining a stable society. Taoism, on the other hand, focused on living in harmony with nature, embracing the flow of the universe, finding balance.
So one about societal order, the other personal balance. Did these philosophies clash or coexist?
They actually complemented each other. Confucianism provided the framework for social order. Taoism offered a path to individual fulfillment. They were different but connected aspects of Chinese thought, influencing everything from art and literature to governance. But while these philosophies were taking root in China, a very different story was unfolding in the West.
From the harmony of ancient China to ancient Greece, known for, well, a bit more drama, city-states, philosophical debates, and those epic battles we still study today, what set the stage for the rise of Greece?
Geography had a huge role. The Greek peninsula, mountainous terrain, limited farmland. This forced the Greeks to look outwards. They became master seafarers. They established colonies all around the Mediterranean, securing resources, especially grain. This need to connect with the world, it really shaped their whole civilization.
So out of necessity, they became explorers, traders, colonizers. And speaking of the Greeks, we can't forget those two giants, Sparta and Athens. Our sources paint them as like polar opposites. But what were the defining characteristics of each?
Sparta was this warrior society, obsessed with discipline and military strength. Boys were trained to become soldiers from a young age. Individual desires were completely subservient to the state, a harsh, regimented existence. And Athens. Athens was the birthplace of democracy. Citizens had a say in their own governance. It was a society that valued debate, philosophy, and the arts.
I'm fascinated by that whole Athenian democracy thing. How did it work? We're talking thousands of years ago.
It was direct democracy, radical even by today's standards. They had the Council of 500, chosen randomly from citizens, sortition it's called. They set the agenda for the assembly, where all citizens could vote on laws, policies, even whether to go to war.
Wow, direct democracy in action. But not everyone was a fan, right? Plato criticized this system. What were his concerns?
Plato, in his work The Republic, argued that ordinary citizens didn't have the knowledge, the expertise to make good decisions. He used the analogy of the ship of state. Would you trust an untrained mob to steer a ship in a storm? He believed in philosopher kings. Wise, just rulers. It's a debate that's still relevant today. Who should hold power? What qualities should we look for in leaders?
It really does make you think about our own systems. But before we dive too deep into Athenian democracy, let's zoom out. We can't talk about Greece without mentioning the Persian Wars.
The clash between the Persian Empire and those independent Greek city-states is one for the books. It was a conflict that would shape the course of Western civilization. It wasn't just about land or resources, it was about different ways of life, different ideas about power.
So we've got this clash of titans, the Persians, led by Cyrus the Great, and then Darius the Great, versus the Greeks, a bunch of independent city-states. What were the key battles?
The Battle of Marathon is legendary. A small Athenian force routed a much larger Persian army. This victory, it sent shockwaves through the Persian Empire. It boosted Greece morale, and it's where we get the idea for the marathon race. A messenger supposedly ran from Marathon to Athens to announce the victory, collapsing dead when he arrived.
It's crazy how a small detail becomes so iconic. What about the other key battles?
The Battle of Thermopylae, another one. A small Spartan force led by King Leonidas, holding off this massive Persian army for days, fighting to the last man. It's this story of incredible bravery, sacrifice, a symbol of resistance against all odds.
Like the ultimate underdog story. But they did face setbacks eventually, right?
Right. The Persians, led by Xerxes, captured Athens, burned much of the city. But the Greeks weren't done fighting. The Battle of Salamis, a naval battle, a turning point. The Athenian general Themistocles used cunning tactics, luring the Persian fleet into a narrow strait. The Greeks could maneuver better, had superior ships. The Persian fleet was decimated. Xerxes had to retreat. And then the Battle of Plataea the next year. That marked the final Greek victory. They secured their independence, paved the way for the golden age of Athens.
From the ashes of war, a golden age. What made this period so special?
It was a time of incredible flourishing in art, architecture, philosophy, theater. The Parthenon, a magnificent temple dedicated to Athena, was built on the Acropolis. Playwrights like Sophocles, Aeschylus, and Aristophanes, their plays are still performed today. It was a period of intellectual and creative energy. It shows the resilience of the human spirit.
It's hard to imagine that level of brilliance coming from that period. But even golden ages don't last forever, do they?
Unfortunately not. Rivalries, especially between Athens and Sparta, led to the Peloponnesian War, a long, devastating conflict that weakened both sides. A classic case of internal strife undermining a once great power. A reminder that even in times of prosperity, the seeds of discord can be there.
It's a cautionary tale that resonates throughout history. But from the ashes of this conflict, a new figure emerges. One who would conquer more territory than perhaps any other leader in history, Alexander the Great.
Alexander, king of Macedon, a military prodigy. He inherited his father's army, but his ambition was on another level. He swept across Greece, then set his sights on Persia, embarking on a campaign that would reshape the ancient world.
His story is full of daring maneuvers, legendary battles. What were some of the key moments?
He defeated the Persian king Darius III at the Battle of Assus. This showed Alexander's tactical brilliance and gave him control of Asia Minor. Then there was the Siege of Tyre, a super-fortified island city that had resisted conquerors for centuries. Alexander wouldn't be deterred. He built this massive causeway connecting the island to the mainland. This allowed his forces to storm the city after a 7-month siege. It was a feat of engineering, military determination. It shocked the ancient world.
It's like something out of a movie. What motivated him to keep pushing east? Was it pure ambition, or was there something more?
He seems to have believed in this vision of a unified world, a fusion of Greek and Persian cultures. He wasn't just conquering, he wanted to create a new order, a Hellenistic world that blended the best of both. It's been debated for centuries. But even his ambitions had limits. His troops, after years of campaigning, finally forced him to turn back at the Indus River. That was the easternmost extent of his empire.
So even Alexander the Great couldn't conquer everything. What happened after he returned from India?
His health, weakened by years of campaigning and, well, maybe a little too much celebrating, started to fail. He died in Babylon in 323 BCE at the age of 32. His massive empire, with no clear successor, was quickly divided among his generals. The end of a remarkable but short era.
It's incredible he achieved so much in such a short time. But what about his legacy? Did his conquests have a lasting impact?
His conquest spread Greek culture and ideas throughout the East. The Hellenistic period that followed saw a fusion of Greek and Eastern traditions. In art, architecture, philosophy, and science. Cities like Alexandria became centers of learning and cultural exchange. Alexander's vision of a unified world, even though it didn't work out, it had a lasting impact. But while his empire crumbled in the East, a new power was rising in the West, one that would overshadow even his achievements: Rome.
From the ashes of Alexander's empire, the Roman eagle takes flight. And to achieve that dominance, they had to face a powerful enemy, Carthage. This clash, the Punic Wars, spanned over a century and would decide the fate of the Western Mediterranean. What were the roots of this conflict?
It was this clash of civilizations, a rivalry for control of trade routes, resources, and ultimately, supremacy. Rome, expanding outwards from Italy, saw Carthage, a powerful trading empire based in North Africa, as a threat to its ambitions.
So the Punic Wars involved some pretty epic battles. And I know there's a certain Carthaginian general, Hannibal, who made things very interesting for the Romans. What can you tell us about him?
Hannibal was a brilliant military strategist, a master of tactics and logistics. His invasion of Italy, crossing the Alps with elephants no less, really shocked the Romans. He won a string of victories, including the Battle of Cannae. still studied in military academies today because of its tactical
I
brilliance.
can just imagine the look on the Roman soldiers' faces, seeing elephants marching towards them. Terrifying. But Rome did eventually win, right?
Yes. After a long, brutal conflict, the Roman general Scipio Africanus learned from Hannibal's tactics. He defeated him at the Battle of Zama in North Africa. This marked the end of the Second Punic War, solidified Roman dominance in the Western Mediterranean, and Carthage,
Yeah.
utterly destroyed.
A reminder that victory often comes at a high price for both sides. But with Carthage defeated, Rome's rise seemed unstoppable. What were some of the internal challenges they faced as they transitioned from a republic to an empire?
Well, Rome's republican system, with its checks and balances, was designed to prevent the concentration of power. But as they expanded, the armies became super powerful, and ambitious generals, like Julius Caesar, challenged the Senate's authority.
Julius Caesar. His story is one of ambition, military genius, and ultimately tragedy. What were some of the key moments in his rise?
Caesar's conquest of Gaul, present-day France, Belgium demonstrated his military skills and his ruthlessness. And he was a master of propaganda. He documented his campaigns and commentaries on the Gallic War. This solidified his reputation. When ordered to disband his army, Caesar famously crossed the Rubicon River, an act of defiance. It was the start of a civil war.
A gamble. A point of no return. What happened next?
Caesar's forces clashed with those loyal to the Senate, led by Pompey the Great, his former ally, son-in-law. The Battle of Pharsalus in Greece was decisive. Caesar's forces routed Pompey's army. Pompey fled to Egypt, was assassinated, leaving Caesar as the undisputed master of Rome.
So Caesar, having defeated his rivals, became dictator of Rome. What did he do with this new power?
He implemented reforms, centralized power, started big construction projects, granted citizenship to people in the provinces, even reformed the calendar, the Julian calendar, with a few changes is what we use today.
It seems like he was trying to create a more unified, efficient state. But his reign didn't last, did it?
No. Caesar's ambition and his disregard for the Senate made him enemies. In 44 BCE, he was assassinated by senators, a dramatic end that plunged Rome into turmoil.
A tragic end. What happened after his assassination? Did Rome descend into chaos?
There was a power struggle, but eventually Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, emerged victorious. He defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium. He secured his position as the first Roman emperor. He took the name Augustus.
Augustus, the first in a long line of emperors. His reign ushered in a period of peace, didn't it? Tell me about the Pax Romana.
The Pax Romana, lasting for over 2 centuries. This is when the Roman Empire reached its peak. Trade flourished, infrastructure was developed, and Roman culture spread throughout the Mediterranean. It was a golden age, a period of stability and achievement.
Remarkable how one man could bring about such a change. But in this period of stability, a new religion was taking root, one that would eventually challenge the very foundations of the Roman Empire, Christianity.
Our sources introduce us to Jesus Christ, born in the Roman province of Judea. His teachings, emphasizing love, compassion, and forgiveness, resonated with people across the empire and eventually beyond.
It's interesting how Jesus' birth coincided with a Roman census. Why was that so significant?
While the census, ordered by Caesar Augustus, required everyone to return to their hometowns to register. This simple administrative act played a role in one of history's most influential stories. Joseph and Mary traveled to Bethlehem because of that census. That's where Jesus was born. A reminder of how these historical events, big and small, can intersect.
It really does make you appreciate the tapestry of history, doesn't it?
Right.
So Christianity begins to spread. But it wasn't always welcome, was it?
The early Christians were persecuted by the Roman authorities. They saw this new religion as a threat. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE. Nero blamed the Christians for it. This led to widespread persecution.
Seems like any challenge to the power structure was met with repression. Were there any other key moments of conflict?
The Jewish revolt in Judea, fueled by resistance to Roman rule, resulted in crackdowns. The destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in 70 CE. It was devastating for the Jewish people, a sign of Rome's use of force to maintain control. But as Rome was at its peak, cracks were starting to show.
Even the Roman Empire wasn't immune to pressures. What were some of the challenges that led to its decline?
The Roman Empire. Vast, overextended. Revolts in Judea drained resources. The rise of the Sasanian Empire in Persia was a challenge in the east. Internal divisions and economic instability further weakened the empire. And then you have the barbarian migrations. They would eventually bring about its downfall.
It sounds like a perfect storm. What about Diocletian? Our sources mention his reforms, Did those work?
Diocletian was facing a leadership crisis, a crumbling economy. He divided the empire into 4 administrative units, the Tetrarchy. He implemented price controls and other measures. His reforms bought the empire time, but they created new bureaucracy, and they contributed to power struggles.
So temporary fix. What about Constantine the Great, a pivotal figure?
Right. Constantine's victory at the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312 CE was a turning point. He said he saw a vision of the cross. His conversion to Christianity changed everything for Rome and the future of Christianity.
From persecuted to embraced. Amazing how quickly things changed. What was the impact of his conversion?
It led to a huge shift in the empire's religious landscape. In 313 CE, he issued the Edict of Milan, granting tolerance to Christians. He convened the First Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, a gathering of bishops trying to establish Christian doctrine and address theological disputes.
From a persecuted minority to the favored religion, a remarkable transformation. But even as Christianity gained influence, a new threat appeared in the East. The Huns.
The Huns, nomadic, incredible horsemen and fierce warriors, their arrival sent shockwaves through Europe. Their raids and conquests pushed Germanic tribes westward, putting pressure on Rome. They were chaos and destruction.
So the Huns were indirectly responsible for adding to the pressure on Rome's borders. What happened next? Did the Western Roman Empire crumble?
Yes, the final division of the Roman Empire happened in 395 CE, after Theodosius died, the last emperor to rule a unified Rome. His sons, Honorius and Arcadius, inherited the West and East, but the Western Empire, weakened by internal strife and those relentless barbarian invasions, was on the verge of collapse.
It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck. What were some of the key events that marked the fall?
The sack of Rome by the Visigoths in 410 CE. A symbolic blow. A stark reminder of the empire's vulnerability. Attila the Hun, the scourge of God, led these devastating campaigns across Europe in the mid-5th century, weakening Roman defenses, spreading terror.
Attila the Hun. Now, there's a name that sends chills down your spine. But even Attila couldn't conquer everything, could he?
Remarkably, no. He was defeated at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains in 451 CE. A coalition of Roman and Visigothic forces stopped him, but it couldn't save the empire.
So it was hanging by a thread. What finally ended it?
The deposition of Romulus Augustus, the last Western Roman emperor, by the Germanic general Odoacer in 476 CE. That's traditionally marked as the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Not a dramatic event, more like a whimper. The empire had been crumbling for decades. Romulus Augustus was basically a figurehead.
It's interesting how the fall of such a mighty empire could be such a seemingly insignificant event. But while the Western Roman Empire was collapsing, new powers were emerging, weren't they? What was happening in India during this time?
In India, the Gupta Empire was flourishing, a period known as the Golden Age of India. They made huge advancements in math, astronomy, art. Their legacy would influence Indian culture for centuries.
Amazing. While Europe was in upheaval, India was experiencing this intellectual and cultural vibrancy. What were some of the key Gupta achievements?
Well, in mathematics, mathematicians like Aryabhata calculated the Earth's circumference and developed ways to calculate pi and square roots. In astronomy, they developed calendars and understood the Earth's rotation. And artistically, the Ajanta cave paintings, the Iron Pillar of Delhi, testaments to their skill.
Incredible innovation and creativity. It challenges that Eurocentric view of history, doesn't it? But back in Europe, a new chapter was beginning, the Middle Ages.
The fall of the Western Roman Empire ushered in a new era in Europe, the Middle Ages. This period, sometimes called a Dark Age, saw the emergence of new kingdoms, the spread of Christianity, a new social and political order, a time of transition, fragmentation, and consolidation, Europe figuring itself out.
I'm always struck by that term Dark Ages. Implies a decline. But wasn't that simple? Weren't there significant developments during the Middle Ages?
You're right to question that view. The Middle Ages were complex and dynamic, challenges and setbacks, yes, but also achievements in art, architecture, literature, technology.
I agree. Let's look deeper. Our sources highlight the emergence of the Frankish kingdom under Clovis III. What made him so significant?
Clovis was a skilled military leader. He united the Frankish tribes, and he expanded his kingdom. His conversion to Christianity in 496 CE had a huge impact on Europe. It aligned the Franks with the papacy and created a powerful Christian kingdom that would shape European history.
So a warrior king who embraced Christianity. What about the Eastern Roman Empire? What happened to that half of the Roman world?
The Eastern Roman Empire in Constantinople survived and thrived for centuries. It became the Byzantine Empire. They preserved Roman traditions while developing their own unique character.
And speaking of the Byzantine Empire, we can't forget Justinian I, one of those influential Byzantine emperors. What were some of his achievements?
Justinian I, who ruled from 527 to 565 CE, was an ambitious ruler. He tried to reconquer lost Roman territories in the West. He had some success in North Africa, Italy. He also codified Roman law into the Corpus Juris Civilis. This legal work would impact legal systems throughout Europe.
It sounds like he was trying to reclaim the legacy of Rome, territorially and legally.
Yeah.
What about his architectural achievements? Didn't he build a pretty famous building?
Yes, the Hagia Sophia, a magnificent church in Constantinople, considered one of the greatest architectural achievements of all time. Its dome and mosaics show Byzantine engineering, their artistry. It shows that fusion of Roman and Eastern influences that marked Byzantine culture.
It's amazing that this building from over 1,500 years ago still stands today. But while the Byzantine Empire was doing well in the East, a new force was coming out of the Arabian Peninsula, Islam.
The Prophet Muhammad founded Islam in the 7th century CE. He received revelations from God. His teachings, emphasizing oneness of God and submission to his will, spread rapidly throughout Arabia and beyond, transforming the world.
It's incredible how quickly Islam spread. What contributed to that?
Well, it was a few things. Muhammad's teachings appealed to people from all kinds of backgrounds, a message of equality, social justice. The early Muslims were very organized, and they were driven by a belief in their mission. And the Muslim armies were skilled, and they were fueled by their religious beliefs. They expanded the reach of Islam across huge territories.
So a mix of zeal, social appeal, and military power. What were some of the key areas they conquered?
The early conquest included Byzantine provinces, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, as well as the Sasanian Empire and Persia. They also took North Africa, eventually crossing into the Iberian Peninsula in 711 CE. That's how Muslim rule was established in Spain and Portugal.
Remarkable how quickly the Islamic world expanded, coming into contact with the Byzantines in the East and Christian kingdoms in the West. Were there any key moments of interaction or conflict between them?
The Battle of Tours in 732 CE, a pivotal moment. Charles Martel, the Frankish leader, defeated a Muslim army, halting their advance into Europe.
It's one of those battles that's etched in history, a clash of civilizations. But while the Franks were holding back the Muslims in the West, a new power was rising in Western Europe, one that sought to revive the Roman Empire, the Carolingian Empire.
Charlemagne, the grandson of Charles Martel, he became king of the Franks in 768 CE. He was a skilled military leader, a devout Christian, and an ambitious ruler. He expanded the Frankish kingdom. Eventually, it included most of Western Europe.
Another warrior king embracing Christianity. Charlemagne seems to have had a grand vision. What were some of his goals?
His ambitions went beyond conquest. He wanted to revive learning and culture. This led to a period of intellectual and artistic revival known as the Carolingian Renaissance. He also standardized weights and measures, reformed the legal system, and established a strong central administration.
It sounds like he was trying to create a new Roman Empire, but with a Christian focus. What was his relationship with the papacy like?
Well, it was complicated, full of tension. He saw himself as the protector of the church, but he also asserted his authority over church matters. He appointed bishops and issued decrees that had an impact on how the church was governed. And in 800 CE, on Christmas Day, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne Holy Roman Emperor in Rome. This momentous event symbolized the fusion of secular and religious power in Western Europe.
Wow. Crowned emperor on Christmas Day. It's like something out of a medieval epic. But Charlemagne's empire, even with all his effort, didn't last, did it?
No, empires rarely do. Charlemagne's empire was vast and diverse. It faced lots of challenges, internal divisions, external threats. After he died in 814 CE, his empire was divided among his sons, and this led to fragmentation and conflict. The Carolingian Renaissance, although it was a time of cultural revival, was ultimately short-lived.
A reminder that even the most powerful empires are fleeting, vulnerable to history. Speaking of forces of history, we can't ignore the Vikings, those seafaring raiders from Scandinavia who terrorized Europe's coasts. What were some of the key impacts of the Viking Age?
The Viking raids, beginning in the late 8th century CE, had a big impact on Europe. They targeted monasteries, settlements, even cities. But they were more than raiders. They were also traders, explorers, and settlers. They established trade networks and settlements all over.
I'm always fascinated by their seafaring abilities. How did they travel such huge distances in those long ships? What were some of their navigational techniques?
They were master navigators. They used celestial navigation, coastal landmarks, even bird migration patterns. And they developed great shipbuilding techniques, making long ships that were fast and seaworthy, capable of navigating rivers and open seas.
Amazing to think of them crossing the Atlantic in those open boats way before Columbus. But their raids weren't just about plunder, were they? What else motivated them?
You're right, plunder was definitely a motivating factor, but they also wanted to find new trade routes, fertile land, and opportunities to settle. Overpopulation in Scandinavia, political instability, a thirst for adventure, those all played a role.
So it was a complex mix of things. What were some of the areas they targeted, and what were the long-term consequences?
They went after coastal regions across Europe, Ireland, England, France, Spain, even the Mediterranean. They raided monasteries, towns, cities. But they also established trading posts and settlements. Their influence can be seen in place names, language, even cultural traditions across Europe.
It's fascinating how a group that started as raiders could have such a lasting impact. Our sources mention feudalism as a response to the Viking threat. How did that work?
Well, the threat of Viking raids led to a decline in central authority, a rise in local power. Feudalism emerged as a way to provide security in a chaotic world. Lords gave land to vassals in return for military service and loyalty, and this created a hierarchical system that shaped Europe for centuries.
So, out of chaos, new order emerges. Seems to be a recurring theme in history. What about England? How did they fare against the Vikings?
England was hit with waves of Viking invasions. Eventually, this led to Viking kingdoms in parts of the country. But Alfred the Great, the King of Wessex, became a key figure of resistance. He rallied the English forces, pushed back against Viking expansion.
Alfred the Great, he sounds like a hero from a medieval epic.
Yeah.
What were some of the strategies?
He was more than just a skilled military leader. He was a smart strategist and a visionary. He understood the importance of fortifications. He created a network of fortified towns, or burhs, which served as defenses against Viking attacks. And he reformed the English army so it could react quickly to attacks. But perhaps his most important contribution was his investment in education and literacy. He believed that a strong, educated population was essential.
So he not only defended his kingdom, but also built a foundation for a stronger England. What about the kings who came after him? Were they able to build on that legacy?
Alfred's successors, especially his grandson, Aethelstan, continued consolidating English power and expanding. Aethelstan had a decisive victory over a group of Viking and Celtic armies at the Battle of Brunanburh in 937 CE. This victory paved the way for the unification of England under his rule.
So from the chaos of the Viking Age, we see a unified England. It shows how adaptable humans can be. But while England was becoming a nation, what was happening in Eastern Europe?
A new power was emerging in Eastern Europe, and it also had Viking roots, the Kievan-Ruses. Legend says that the Viking leader Rurik was asked to rule over the city of Novgorod in the mid-9th century CE, and this began a dynasty that would shape the future of Russia.
It's amazing how these Vikings, who we think of as raiders and warriors, also had a hand in building new political entities. What happened in the Kievan Ruses?
Under Oleg of Novgorod, who was related to Rurik, the Kievan-Ruses expanded their territory. They conquered Kiev, which was strategically important. They established a powerful state that controlled trade routes between Scandinavia and the Byzantine Empire. And they adopted Eastern Orthodox Christianity, creating cultural and religious ties with the Byzantine world. The Kievan-Ruses, they were the foundation for Russia as a major power in Eastern Europe.
So a Viking-founded state, embracing Eastern Orthodox Christianity, controlling major trade routes. It's a fascinating blend, what led to their decline.
Like many empires before it, the Kievan-Ruses fell apart because of internal divisions and external pressures. Yaroslav the Wise died in 1054 CE, and this led to a period where different princes fought for power. And then the Mongol invasions of the 13th century CE were devastating. They destroyed the Kievan-Ruses' unity and brought about a new era of Mongol rule.
Another reminder that power is fleeting. But as the Kievan-Ruses was declining in the east, a new version of the Holy Roman Empire was forming in the west.
Ottokar II, the king of the East Franks, became really powerful in the 10th century CE. He solidified his power in Germany. He defeated the Magyars, those nomadic raiders, at the Battle of Lechfeld in 955 CE, and he also got involved in Italian politics. He asserted his authority over the papacy.
Otto, a real power player. He controlled Germany and exerted his influence in Italy. Did he have ambitions beyond those two regions?
Well, in 962 CE, Pope John XII crowned Otto I as Holy Roman Emperor in Rome. This brought back the imperial title and set the stage for a new political order in Western Europe. The Holy Roman Empire, even though it was never really centralized like the old Roman Empire, would play a major role in European politics and culture for centuries.
The idea of bringing back the Roman Empire seems to have captured the imagination of a lot of European rulers. But this Holy Roman Empire had its own issues, right? What shaped its development?
It was complex and decentralized, a mixture of kingdoms, duchies, and other territories ruled by powerful nobles. The emperor's authority was always being challenged, and conflict between the emperor and the pope, or between the emperor and the nobles, was common. The investiture controversy, a fight over who could appoint bishops, was a major turning point. It weakened the emperor and made the papacy more powerful.
Sounds like a constant struggle for power, a balancing act between secular and religious authorities. But while the Holy Roman Empire was dealing with these internal issues, the Byzantine Empire faced a new threat from the east, the Seljuk Turks.
The Seljuk Turks were nomads who'd converted to Islam. They moved into Persia in the 11th century CE, and they quickly created a powerful empire. They beat the Byzantine army at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071 CE, and they conquered huge chunks of Anatolia, which was the heartland of the Byzantine Empire.
It seems like that battle was a big turning point, showing how the Byzantine Empire was in decline. What caused that defeat, and what were the lasting consequences?
The Byzantine Empire was weakened because of internal divisions, not enough money, and a series of emperors who weren't very effective. The Seljuk Turks were a strong, ambitious force, led by great military commanders. The Battle of Manzikert cost the Byzantines most of Anatolia, which was a major source of soldiers and resources for them. This defeat really marked the beginning of the Byzantine decline. It made them vulnerable to more threats, like the Crusades.
Speaking of the Crusades, those religious wars between Christian Europe and the Muslim world, they were a huge part of the Middle Ages. What caused those conflicts?
The Crusades were caused by a lot of things. Religious, political, and economic motivations all played a role. The Seljuk Turks took Jerusalem in 1071 CE. This outraged Christians all over Europe who believed that the Holy Land was sacred. Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos needed help against the Seljuks, so he asked Pope Urban II for military support. In 1095 CE, the Pope called for a holy war to take back the Holy Land.
So it was religious fervor and political strategy working together. What happened in the First Crusade, and what were the long-term consequences?
The First Crusade was an amazing feat of military organization. Crusader armies came from all over Europe, marched to the Holy Land, and took Nicaea in 1097 CE. They beat a Seljuk army at the Battle of Dorylaeum, and finally they captured Jerusalem in 1099 CE. They set up a bunch of Crusader states in the Levant, which lasted for almost 200 years. But the Crusades, even though they were successful at first, didn't achieve their main goal of holding on to the Holy Land. And they also really changed the relationship between the East and West, creating a lot of mistrust and conflict.
It's a good example of how even wars that are supposedly about religion are often driven by things like power, territory, and maybe even a sense of adventure. But while the Crusades were going on in the Middle East, another force was coming out of Central Asia, one that would shake up the world: the Mongols.
The Mongols, led by Genghis Khan, came out of the steppes of Central Asia in the early 13th century. They united all these nomadic tribes and built one of the biggest, most powerful empires ever. Their conquests were brutal, but they were also strategically brilliant. They changed Eurasia forever.
Genghis Khan. His name makes you think of fierce warriors and massive conquests. What made him so powerful?
Genghis Khan, whose real name was Temujin, was an amazing military strategist. He was charismatic, a great leader, and a ruthless conqueror. He brought the Mongol tribes together through diplomacy, military power, and by eliminating his enemies. He created a very disciplined and loyal army. This fighting force conquered huge parts of Asia.
His conquests were incredibly brutal, but they also united vast areas of Eurasia under Mongol rule. Was that part of his plan, or did it just happen as they expanded?
Genghis Khan wanted to unite the world under Mongol rule. He wanted to create Pax Mongolica, a time of peace and stability enforced by the Mongol army. He was brutal, but he also knew how important trade and cultural exchange were. He encouraged the movement of goods and ideas throughout his massive empire.
So he left behind a complicated legacy: brutality and conquest, but also trade and cultural exchange. What were some of the places the Mongols conquered?
Genghis Khan conquered the Shiya kingdom in what's now northwest China, the Jin dynasty, and the Khwarezmid Empire in Central Asia. He sacked the Jin capital, Zhengdu, in 1215 CE. That's present-day Beijing. His successors kept expanding, going into Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. Their empire went from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe.
It's hard to imagine an empire that big. What was the long-term impact of the Mongols on Eurasia?
The Mongol conquests had a huge impact on Eurasia, for both good and bad. They made trade and cultural exchange easier along the Silk Road. They brought new ideas and technology to different parts of the world. They brought about Pax Mongolica, a time of relative peace and stability. But their conquests were also extremely violent. Millions of people were killed, and many others were forced to leave their homes. Their legacy is a mix of brutality and progress, destruction and connection.
It shows that history is rarely simple. Even the most powerful empires leave behind complicated legacies. But while the Mongols were changing Asia, Europe was going through its own transformation. The late Middle Ages. What were some of the major developments during this time?
The late Middle Ages was a time of huge change and turmoil for Europe. In 1215 CE, King John of England signed the Magna Carta, which put limits on royal power and laid the foundation for constitutional government. The Hundred Years' War between England and France reshaped Western Europe, and the Black Death, one of the worst pandemics in history, swept through Europe in the mid-14th century CE, killing millions and transforming European society.
The Black Death. It's hard to imagine the fear and despair people must have felt. What were the social and economic consequences of this pandemic?
The Black Death was devastating for Europe. Widespread death, not enough workers, economic problems, and social unrest. And it also shook people's faith in traditional institutions and beliefs. But even in the midst of this tragedy, there were some unexpected consequences. The labor shortages gave peasants more power. This led to better wages and working conditions. And the drop in population meant there was a lot of land available. This encouraged innovation in agriculture and boosted food production.
It's amazing how, even in the middle of such terrible events, there can be positive change. Our sources also mention the Mali Empire in Africa during this time. What made this empire so special?
The Mali Empire was in West Africa. It thrived during the late Middle Ages and became a major hub for trade and Islamic learning. Mansa Musa, who ruled from 1312 to 1337 CE, was famous for his wealth and his pilgrimage to Mecca. He really showed the world how wealthy and influential his empire was.
Mansa Musa's pilgrimage is legendary. What made the Mali Empire so wealthy?
Their wealth came from controlling key trade routes across the Sahara Desert, especially the gold and salt trade. Mansa Musa's strong leadership, the way he supported Islamic scholarship and the arts, also helped his empire flourish. Timbuktu became a really important center for learning. It attracted scholars from all over the Islamic world.
Even in times of upheaval, centers of learning can thrive. They preserve and share knowledge with future generations. But while the Mali Empire was doing well in Africa, Europe was going through a cultural rebirth, the Renaissance.
The Renaissance was a time of huge artistic, intellectual, and cultural growth. It started in Italy in the 14th century CE and spread across Europe. It was all about rediscovering classical learning, celebrating humanism, and seeing a surge in creativity in art, literature, and science.
The Renaissance, a time of artistic genius and new ideas. What were some of the key ideas and people that shaped this era?
Humanism was at the heart of the Renaissance worldview. It's a philosophy that emphasizes the worth and agency of human beings. Leonardo da Vinci was a true Renaissance man. He excelled at art, science, and engineering. Michelangelo's sculptures, paintings, and architecture left a permanent mark on European art. Niccolo Machiavelli was a political philosopher. He had a practical and sometimes cynical view of power in his book, The Prince. People are still studying and debating that book today.
It was a time of amazing people, a period that changed how people thought about being human. But as the Renaissance was reaching its peak, the world was on the verge of a new age of exploration and discovery, wasn't it?
The fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks in 1453 CE was a huge turning point. It marked the end of the Byzantine Empire, and it made European powers look for new ways to trade with the East. This led to more exploration by sea and the discovery of the Americas.
Columbus's voyages in 1492 CE opened up a whole new world to Europeans, both good and bad. And while they were exploring the globe, another huge event was shaking up the Christian world, the Reformation.
The Reformation was a religious movement that challenged the Catholic Church. It started in the early 16th century CE. Martin Luther, a German monk and theologian, started the Reformation with his 95 Theses in 1517 CE. He criticized the Church's practices and wanted reform.
Luther's challenge to the Church had a huge impact. It led to new Protestant denominations and really changed the religious landscape of Europe. What were some of the main issues that drove the Reformation?
Luther's biggest issue was the church's sale of indulgences, which people saw as a way to pay for forgiveness. He believed that faith and scripture were the only sources of religious authority. He challenged the pope and the entire church hierarchy.
A real clash of ideologies, a battle for the future of Christianity. What were some of the key figures and movements that came out of the Reformation?
John Calvin, a French theologian, created his own theological system that emphasized predestination and God's sovereignty. His ideas led to Presbyterianism and other Reformed churches. The English Reformation was started by King Henry VIII, who wanted to get his marriage annulled. This resulted in the Church of England, with the monarch as the head of the church.
So Europe was going through religious and political upheaval. And while all this was going on, European powers were busy creating empires all over the world, weren't they?
The Age of Exploration led to Europeans colonizing the Americas, Africa, and Asia. They were looking for new trade routes. The Spanish conquistadors conquered the Aztec and Inca empires in the 16th century CE. They were driven by religion and greed, and they took huge amounts of wealth for Spain.
The stories of Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro conquering the Aztec and Inca empires are brutal. How did such a small number of conquistadors manage to take down these powerful empires?
The Spanish had a few advantages. They had better weapons, guns, cannons, steel armor, and they had horses, which the native people had never seen before. They also took advantage of divisions between different native groups. They made alliances with people who didn't like the Aztecs or Incas. And disease was a huge factor. European diseases, especially smallpox, killed a lot of indigenous people.
It shows the destructive power of technology and disease. It shows how vulnerable even the most powerful empires can be. What about the Ottoman Empire? They were a major player during this time too, right?
The Ottoman Empire reached its peak under Suleiman the Magnificent in the 16th century CE. Suleiman expanded the empire, reformed the legal system, and oversaw a golden age of art, architecture, and literature.
Sounds like a great time for the Ottomans. What were some of their accomplishments?
Well, Suleiman conquered Belgrade, Rhodes, and Hungary. He also tried to take Vienna in 1529 CE, but he didn't succeed. He built magnificent mosques, like the Süleymani Mosque in Istanbul, and he developed a complex system of government for his huge empire. The Ottomans, under Suleiman, were a major force in the Mediterranean.
So a powerful empire covering 3 continents with a rich cultural heritage. But as the 16th century ended, Europe was on the verge of another conflict, and this time it was about religion again.
The 30 Years' War started in 1618 CE. It was one of the worst conflicts in European history. It started as a war between Catholics and Protestants in the Holy Roman Empire, but it eventually involved most of the major European powers.
It sounds like it was a chaotic, brutal war. What were some of the key events and consequences?
The war was full of sieges, massacres, and widespread destruction. The sack of Magdeburg in 1631 CE, when Catholic forces killed thousands of Protestant civilians, shows just how brutal it was. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 CE ended the war. It created a new balance of power in Europe based on state sovereignty and religious tolerance. But the war really hurt Germany. It was ravaged by armies, and famine and disease were rampant.
Another reminder of the cost of conflict. Meanwhile, in China, a new dynasty was coming to power, the Qing dynasty.
The Qing dynasty was founded by the Manchu people, and they overthrew the Ming dynasty in 1644 CE. They ruled over China for almost 300 years. It was a time of territorial expansion, economic growth, and great cultural achievements.
Another dynasty in China. What made the Qing dynasty unique?
The Qing rulers, even though they were foreigners, embraced a lot of Chinese customs and traditions. They wanted to be a part of the Chinese system. They expanded the empire's territory, taking over Tibet, Xinjiang, and Taiwan. The Kangxi Emperor, who ruled from 1661 to 1722 CE, is considered one of the best Qing emperors. His reign was a time of peace, prosperity, and cultural achievements.
It's interesting how the Qing rulers managed to rule such a large, diverse empire. But while China was relatively stable, Europe was fighting again. This time it was the War of the Spanish Succession.
The War of the Spanish Succession, which lasted from 1701 to 1714 CE, started because King Charles II of Spain died without any children. This caused a fight over who would rule Spain, with France and Austria both wanting control of the Spanish Empire.
Sounds like another power struggle. Who were the key players in this conflict?
King Louis XIV of France supported his grandson, Philip of Anjou. Austria, ruled by the Habsburg Emperor Leopold I, supported Archduke Charles, who was also a Habsburg. Other European powers got involved too. Great Britain, the Dutch Republic, and Portugal joined forces against France and Spain.
Another huge European war with complicated alliances. What happened in the end?
The Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 CE ended the war. Philip of Anjou became the King of Spain, but he had to promise not to claim the French throne. This prevented the two kingdoms from uniting. The treaty also changed who controlled different territories, showing how the balance of power in Europe was shifting. Great Britain did really well out of the war. They gained land in North America and the Mediterranean, and this helped them build their global empire.
Seems like these wars constantly changed Europe. But while European powers were fighting for power, something new was happening across the Atlantic. The American Revolution.
The American Revolution was a war for independence. The 13 American colonies fought against Great Britain, and it changed the world. The United States of America became a new nation based on the ideas of freedom, equality, and self-government. It inspired other revolutions all over the world.
It's a story that still inspires people today. What were some of the key events and people in the American Revolution?
The Declaration of Independence, which was adopted on July 4th, 1776, declared that the 13 colonies were no longer part of Great Britain. It explained the ideals that the new nation was based on. Thomas Jefferson, who wrote most of the Declaration, was inspired by Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke.
It's amazing how those Enlightenment ideas from Europe inspired a revolution in the American colonies. What about the military side of the conflict? Who led the Americans to victory?
George Washington, the commander of the Continental Army, was a key leader. He guided the American forces and eventually defeated the British. He was a brilliant strategist and a determined leader who inspired his troops. He was essential to winning American independence.
What about the French? Didn't they help the Americans?
Yes, they did. France wanted to weaken Great Britain, so they gave the American colonies military and financial support. The Marquis de Lafayette, a young French nobleman, was a close friend of George Washington. He was instrumental in getting French support for the Americans. And the French Navy, led by Admiral de Grasse, was critical in the Battle of Yorktown in 1781. They trapped the British Army and forced them to surrender. That was basically the end of the war.
A victory for the Americans with help from the French. What were the long-term effects of the American Revolution?
The American Revolution inspired other revolutions all over the world, including the French Revolution. The United States became an example of a republic and a symbol of hope for people who wanted freedom. Its legacy still influences the world today, making people debate about democracy, human rights, and the role of government.
It shows how powerful ideas can be. It shows that even the strongest empires can be challenged. And it shows that humans long for freedom. Speaking of revolutions, the American ideals of freedom and equality soon caused another revolution, this time in Europe, the French Revolution.
The French Revolution started in 1789. It was a time of great change in French history. It got rid of the monarchy, created a republic, and led to radical social and political changes. It really challenged European society.
It's a revolution that still fascinates people. It's a story of hope, violence, and the ongoing fight for freedom. What caused this upheaval?
France had a lot of problems in the late 18th century. Economic inequality, government corruption, and the aristocracy's lavish lifestyle made the common people resentful. The American Revolution also inspired French intellectuals and reformers.
So it was a mix of economic hardship, political problems, and Enlightenment ideas. That's what led to the revolution. What happened in the early stages of the French Revolution?
The storming of the Bastille on July 14, 1789, is considered the beginning of the French Revolution. The Bastille was a royal prison. The National Assembly, which represented the common people, adopted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, a document that outlined the basic rights of all citizens.
That was a powerful statement, a rejection of the old ways. But the revolution wasn't peaceful, was it?
No. It was chaotic and violent. King Louis VI and Queen Marie Antoinette were executed in 1793, and this was the end of the monarchy. Then came the Reign of Terror. Thousands of people who were seen as enemies of the revolution were executed.
It seems like the revolution ended up destroying the very people it was trying to help. What caused all this violence and instability?
The French Revolution was a complicated event with many different causes. Social and economic inequality, political instability, and the history of absolute monarchy all created a very tense situation. And then the revolution was also influenced by Enlightenment ideas, which made people question traditional authority and emphasized individual rights. The revolution's goals and the resistance from people who benefited from the old system created a cycle of violence.
It's a reminder that even when revolutions are based on good ideas, they can be very destructive. How did the Reign of Terror end?
The Reign of Terror ended in July 1794 with the Thermidorian reaction. Robespierre and his allies were removed from power and executed. This ended the most radical phase of the revolution, but France was still very unstable.
So after a period of extreme violence, the revolution was trying to find a more moderate way forward. But a new figure would emerge from all this chaos, someone who would change the fate of France and Europe, Napoleon Bonaparte.
Napoleon Bonaparte was a brilliant military commander and a very ambitious politician. He rose to power during the French Revolution. He took control of the government in a coup in 1799, making himself first consul. This was effectively the end of the French Revolution.
Napoleon's story is incredible. He came from nothing and became one of the most powerful men in Europe. What were some of his early successes?
Napoleon's military campaigns were incredibly successful. His armies moved quickly, used clever maneuvers, and his tactics were brilliant. He beat Austrian forces at the Battle of Marengo in 1800, giving France control of Italy. He also reformed the French government and legal system. The Napoleonic Code modernized French law and administration.
He was a conqueror and a reformer. He wanted to change Europe and France. But he didn't want to stop there, did he?
No, Napoleon conquered large parts of Europe. He created the French Empire and set up puppet states under his control. His victory over Austria and Russia at the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805 made him the most powerful man in Europe.
It's hard to believe that one man could have such a huge impact. But his ambition was his downfall, wasn't it?
Yes. Napoleon's decision to invade Russia in 1812 was a disaster. The Russian winter and the scorched earth tactics used by the Russian army destroyed his forces. He was forced to retreat.
Classic example of overconfidence leading to failure. He didn't understand his enemy. What happened after the Russian campaign?
After his defeat in Russia, Napoleon's enemies united against him again. He was defeated at the Battle of Leipzig in 1813, and he was forced to give up his throne. They exiled him to Elba, but he escaped and returned to France in 1815. He took back power for a short time during the Hundred Days' War.
So even after being defeated, he was still a threat. He almost got his empire back. But his comeback didn't last long, did it?
No, he was finally defeated at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. A combined British and Prussian army, led by the Duke of Wellington and Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher, crushed his forces. Waterloo marked the end of Napoleon. It was the beginning of a new chapter in European history.
The end of an era. What happened to Napoleon after Waterloo?
They sent him to St. Helena, an island in the South Atlantic. He died there in 1821. But his story is still fascinating. He was a military genius with huge ambition, and he changed the course of European history.
It's a story with a lot of ups and downs. It shows how complex human ambition can be. While Napoleon was changing Europe, another revolution was happening across the Atlantic. This one was inspired by the American and French revolutions, the Latin American Wars of Independence.
The Latin American Wars of Independence happened in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Spanish colonies in Central and South America fought against Spanish rule. They wanted independence. It was a time of huge change as new nations were born in the Americas and the old colonial order was challenged.
It's inspiring to see these colonies fighting for their own future, motivated by the American and French revolutions. Who were some of the leaders of these revolutions?
Simón Bolívar, the liberator, was a huge figure in the Latin American Wars of Independence. He was a brilliant military strategist and a charismatic leader. He was passionate about independence. He liberated Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia from Spanish rule. He wanted to see a unified South America that was free from colonial control. José de San Martín was another important revolutionary leader. He helped Argentina, Chile, and Peru become independent.
It's incredible how these leaders, even when they were outnumbered, managed to inspire their people and win these amazing victories. What helped them succeed?
The Latin American revolutions were fueled by several things. Enlightenment ideas about freedom and self-government spread through books, pamphlets, and secret societies. These ideas inspired the Creole elite. They were also resentful of Spanish rule, which they saw as unfair and oppressive. And when Spain was weakened by the Napoleonic Wars, it gave the independence movements a chance to grow. But most importantly, these revolutions were successful because of the bravery and determination of ordinary people who wanted freedom and a better life.
It shows that revolutions are rarely just the work of a few great men. They are driven by the hopes and sacrifices of many people. What were some of the long-term consequences of the Latin American Wars of Independence?
Well, many new countries were created in Central and South America, but these new nations faced many challenges: political instability, economic inequality, and conflicts between different regions. And the legacy of colonialism continued to influence these countries for many years.
It shows that the fight for freedom and self-determination is a long and complicated process. It doesn't end when a country declares independence. But as the 19th century continued, another revolution was changing the world, one that would completely change human society, the Industrial Revolution.
The Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain in the late 18th century, and it eventually spread across Europe and the rest of the world. It was a time of incredible technological advances, economic growth, and social change. It was a shift from farming and handcrafts to industries based on mass production, factories, and new technologies like steam power and machines.
This revolution changed how we live and work, how we make things, and how we use things. What were some of the key inventions that caused the Industrial Revolution?
The Industrial Revolution happened because of several connected innovations. James Watt's improved steam engine, which he invented in the 1760s, changed transportation and manufacturing. New textile machines, like the spinning jenny and the power loom, made it possible to produce much more cloth. And the development of railroads and steamships revolutionized transportation, making it easier to trade, communicate, and travel.
Amazing how quickly these new technologies spread and changed entire societies.
Wow.
But there were downsides too, right?
Yes, even though the Industrial Revolution was a time of amazing progress, it also had negative consequences. Cities grew very quickly, and this led to overcrowding, pollution, and social problems. Factory conditions were often terrible. Workers had to work long hours for little pay, and child labor was common. The fact that a small number of people held most of the wealth led to social divisions and unrest.
It's a good point. Progress often has a price. What were some of the intellectual responses to the problems and inequalities created by the Industrial Revolution?
The Industrial Revolution caused new social and political movements like socialism and communism. These movements wanted to solve the problems of poverty, inequality, and exploitation. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, in their 1848 pamphlet, The Communist Manifesto, were very critical of capitalism. They argued that it was unfair to workers.
Marx and Engels' ideas were very influential in the 20th century. What were some of the other consequences of the Industrial Revolution?
The Industrial Revolution led to European imperialism. European powers wanted new markets and resources for their growing industries. The scramble for Africa in the late 19th century saw European powers dividing Africa and creating colonies to take advantage of its resources.
A terrible chapter in history. It shows how greed and the desire for power can lead to injustice. What caused the scramble for Africa?
There were several factors. The Industrial Revolution made Europeans want more raw materials, like rubber, diamonds, and copper, which were plentiful in Africa. The competition between European powers for territory also fueled the scramble, and racist ideas, which said that Africans were inferior, were used to justify European domination.
A sad reminder of how human greed can create so much suffering. But as the 19th century came to an end, the world was about to face a war that would change everything, World War I.
World War I started in 1914, and it was a global conflict. New technologies like machine guns, poison gas, and tanks led to massive casualties and a lot of destruction.
It's often called the Great War, and it shattered the idea that humanity was becoming more peaceful and rational. What caused World War I?
It was a complicated mix of alliances, rivalries, and militarism. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary by a Serbian nationalist in Sarajevo in 1914 was the spark that started the war. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, and this set off a chain reaction that pulled Germany, Russia, France, and Great Britain into the conflict.
It shows how fragile peace can be. What made World War I different from previous wars?
World War I was a trench war. Armies dug in along fortified lines that stretched across Europe. Battles like the Somme and Verdun caused incredible numbers of casualties. Millions of soldiers were killed or wounded, and new technologies like poison gas were terrifying and had a devastating impact on soldiers. It was a war of attrition, a brutal, pointless war that left Europe deeply traumatized.
It's hard to imagine millions of men stuck in trenches facing death every day. How did this awful war finally end?
It ended on November 11, 1918, with the armistice. Germany, which was exhausted, agreed to stop fighting after the Allies won a series of battles on the Western Front. The war had lasted for over 4 years and left millions dead. Europe was in ruins.
The war to end all wars. It's ironic, considering all the wars that followed. What were some of the long-term effects of World War I?
World War I really changed the course of history. Several empires collapsed: Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian. And the map of Europe was redrawn. The Treaty of Versailles, which was signed in 1919, punished Germany severely. Many historians believe that this treaty contributed to the rise of Adolf Hitler and the start of World War II.
So it was a war that ended one conflict but caused another. What happened after World War I? Did the world become peaceful?
The 1920s were a time of rebuilding and uncertainty. The Roaring Twenties in the United States was a time of economic growth and cultural innovation. Jazz, flapper fashion, and a sense of freedom. But there were problems too. Economic inequality, political extremism, and totalitarian ideologies like fascism and communism.
A decade of highs and lows. The world was trying to recover from the war and figure out what the future would hold. But the peace and prosperity of the 1920s ended with the Great Depression, didn't it?
Yes. The Great Depression, which started in 1929, was a global disaster. Stock market crashes, banks failing, and unemployment led to a lot of suffering and unrest. The Depression made political problems worse, contributing to the rise of extremist ideas and setting the stage for World War II.
It's hard to imagine how awful that time must have been for people. What caused the Great Depression?
It was a few things. Overproduction, risky, speculation, and a decline in global trade all contributed. And then the U.S. stock market crashed in October 1929. This led to a chain reaction of bank failures, and the economy shrank. This spread all over the world.
The world was really interconnected by then. What happened in one place could affect everyone. And from this economic turmoil, a new danger appeared: Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party.
Hitler was a very charismatic and ruthless leader. He used the chaos of the Great Depression to gain power in Germany. He promised to make Germany great again. He blamed Jews, communists, and the Treaty of Versailles for the country's problems.
His message appealed to people who were desperate and looking for someone to blame. Hitler's rise to power was a warning. It showed how dangerous nationalism and authoritarianism can be, especially in times of crisis. How did he come to power?
Well, Hitler joined the Nazi Party in 1921. He tried to take over the government in 1923. It didn't work, but it made him famous. The Nazis used the economic problems and the political instability of the Depression to get support. They promised to fix the economy, restore Germany's pride, and get rid of their enemies. In 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. He quickly took complete control, becoming a dictator, silencing anyone who disagreed with him and persecuting his opponents.
So Hitler took advantage of the political situation, the economic crisis, and the weaknesses of democracy. He turned Germany into a totalitarian state. What did he do next?
He focused on strengthening Germany's military and economy. He brought back conscription, that's mandatory military service. He ignored the Treaty of Versailles and built up the German army. He started being aggressive with other countries. He took over Austria in 1938 and invaded Czechoslovakia in 1939. At first, other European countries tried to appease him, but his actions eventually led to World War II.
Hitler wanted to create a Europe dominated by Germany. This led to the most destructive war in human history, didn't it?
Yes. World War II started on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. The Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, fought against the Allied powers, Great Britain, the United States, the Soviet Union, and others. It was a global war, and millions of people died. Entire countries were destroyed.
It's a stark reminder of the terrible consequences of aggression and totalitarian ideologies. What were some of the most important moments of World War II?
The Battle of Britain, which was fought in 1940, was a crucial victory for the Allies. It stopped Germany from invading Britain. The German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, called Operation Barbarossa, was another turning point. The Soviets eventually pushed back the Germans and were instrumental in the Allied victory. And then the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941. This brought the United States into war. The U.S. had a massive industrial and military capacity. They helped the Allies win in Europe and the Pacific.
It was a truly global war. What happened because of World War II?
World War II changed the world. It led to the creation of the United Nations, which is dedicated to keeping the peace, and then the Holocaust. The Nazis systematically murdered 6 million Jews, a horrible reminder of the dangers of hatred and prejudice. It shows how fragile civilization is and how important it is to protect human rights.
It's something we can never forget. After World War II, a new global order emerged: the Cold War.
The Cold War was a time of tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. It lasted from the end of World War II until the early 1990s. It was a war of ideas, capitalism versus communism. This conflict influenced politics, economics, and culture all over the world.
It was a scary time. Both superpowers had nuclear weapons. What were some of the characteristics of the Cold War?
The Cold War was a time of proxy wars, espionage, and an arms race. The U.S. and the Soviet Union supported different sides in conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, and other places. They also built more and more nuclear weapons. It was a constant threat.
It's a chilling reminder of how dangerous ideological conflicts and arms races can be. But the 20th century also saw incredible scientific and technological progress, didn't it?
Definitely. The 20th century was full of amazing scientific and technological achievements. It shows how inventive humans can be. Albert Einstein's theory of relativity completely changed our understanding of the universe. Antibiotics, vaccines, and other medical breakthroughs improved human health and helped people live longer. The invention of the computer, the transistor, and other electronic devices changed communication, how we process information, and so many parts of our lives. It brought us the information age, a world where everything is connected.
Amazing how much progress happened in such a short time. Our world changed completely. What were some of the key moments in this technological revolution?
The Wright brothers' first flight in 1903 started the age of aviation. The world became smaller. The atomic bomb, which was developed during World War II, was a terrifying weapon, but it also led to advances in nuclear energy and medicine. The Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first satellite, in 1957. This started the space race. And then the Apollo 11 moon landing in 1969, a triumph of human ingenuity and a symbol of exploration.
Incredible. We really can achieve amazing things. But in the 20th century, people also became more aware of how human activity affects the environment, right?
Yes, the environmental movement grew stronger in the 20th century. People became concerned about pollution, deforestation, climate change, and other ways that humans were hurting the planet. Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring, which was published in 1962, warned about the dangers of pesticides and started a debate about how humans interact with nature.
We have to protect our planet. As the 20th century ended, the world was entering a new era, the information age.
The information age is all about digital technology. It has changed how we live, work, communicate, and learn. The internet, computers, mobile devices, and social media connect people all over the world. This creates opportunities, but also problems. It's a world that's constantly changing, and we have to adapt. What an incredible journey this has been. From the beginning of civilization to the digital age, we've seen empires rise and fall, the spread of ideas, the search for meaning, and how innovation and conflict are always connected.
It has been quite a journey. And it's important to remember that history is not just about facts and dates. It's a story that connects us to the past and helps us understand the present. And it can guide us in the future.
It's about seeing patterns. It's about understanding that human societies have always faced similar challenges. It's about seeing how the choices of people in the past still affect us today.
History is not just about the past. It's about the future, too. Our choices today will shape the world that future generations will inherit. So, as we finish up our deep dive into history, what are your takeaways? What resonated with you? What lessons can we learn from history and use in our lives today? Keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep exploring. That's how we make history relevant.